One Piece has many heavily contentious debates in the power scaling community, with the most major ones being 1v1s. One of the most heavily debated ones following the Wano arc is the current Monkey D. Luffy vs Kaido of the Beast. Now, if you're not a power scaler or haven't read Wano yet, this may be a bit confusing at first, but technically we have already seen this fight, and Luffy won it, so why is it so heavily debated within the community? Well, first, let's break it down. Firstly, Kaido vs Luffy was technically not a proper 1v1 fight, as both Luffy and Kaido spent much of the raid on Onigashima fighting other opponents. On top of that, Luffy came into the raid far weaker than Kaido was at the time. At the end of the Luffy vs Kaido fight, Luffy obtained what he calls Gear 5th, and he used this new power to beat Kaido in the last round of their 1v1. The issue many people on Kaido's side take with this is that they believe that Kaido went into the final round with less health than Luffy had, and was more tired due to fighting more people than Luffy had. However, today I will show you why this isn't the case. In fact, I will explain how and why Luffy is the one who actually came into the final round in a worse condition than Kaido, despite technically fighting fewer people and for less time on average. Now let's break down the raid into all of its parts that are important for discussing Luffy vs Kaido. First, we have Luffy vs the Beast Pirates and Kaido vs Scabbards. Second, we have Luffy and the West Generation versus Kaido and Big Mom. Thirdly, we have Luffy and Kaido's first true 1v1, but this is off screen between chapter 10:11 to 10:13. Fourth, we have Kaido vs Yamato. Fifth, we have Mastered Advanced Conquerors Luffy vs Kaido. And the final round is Full Power Kaido and Gear 5th Luffy. Now that we have it all laid out, let's begin with part 1. Kaido vs Scabbards and Luffy vs the Beast Pirates. Kaido fought the Scabbards while Luffy by this point had fought Hundred of Fodder, the Numbers, Ulti, and had a short battle with Queen. During this portion, neither Kaido or Luffy really took any mortal injuries, nor were either knocked out for a long period of time. Yet for some reason, people try to claim that Kaido took a lot more damage than Luffy here, or more damage overall, and to such a degree that it somehow changed the outcome of the fight to be in Luffy's favor. But this doesn't make sense considering how Kaido was, for the most part, trolling the Scabbards and wasn't really trying. He was just mostly just messing around. Luffy at this time was also just using Gear 4 against the Numbers, which we know tires him out more than Kaido would have been just casually fighting the Scabbards. And he overall took more injuries during this time than Kaido did. Round 2. Kaido and Big Mom versus Supernova. The common argument for this part of the raid is that since Kaido fought more people here, he must have taken more damage than Luffy did. The issue with this is that Kaido was stronger than any of the Supernovas were at this point, so any attacks he took, he would dish out tenfold the amount of damage back to Luffy and the others. So yes, technically there was 5 Supernova and only 2 Yonko, but those Yonko on their own were already stronger than all 5 of the Supernova combined. Then Luffy was knocked out, whereas Kaido and Big Mom were standing over the rest of the other Supernova, clearly in a better state than the rest of them, as they all had more injuries and looked far more tired visually. So Luffy is completely knocked out, and then when he gets back up eventually, he looks far more damaged than Kaido was and looks way more exhausted. Kaido at this point was just scarred by Ashura from Zoro, yet this wasn't even enough to put him on his knees, let alone like Luffy, who was just knocked out by Kaido, to the point where he was knocked out for several minutes. To say that Kaido by this point in the fight had taken more damage, but was also in a worse state in terms of stamina, doesn't really make much sense given the context of the events we've seen so far, as Luffy was clearly on the back foot here and was taking the most damage as he also got knocked out, whereas Kaido literally was just standing. Now on to the next round. Round 3. Initial Crew Advanced Conquerors Luffy from chapter 10:10 to chapter 10:13. This is their first proper 1v1 we see in the raid, and yet this is the one where Luffy also loses. Kaido won this round and knocked Luffy out again. This means Luffy again took more damage than Kaido here and was in a worse overall condition as he actually lost the 1v1. I don't see how you can make an argument that Kaido won this 1v1 and still took more damage. Doesn't really make sense considering he knocked Luffy out. So you'd have to say this goes to Kaido this round, who at this point would still have more HP and stamina than Luffy, and has not even used his full power yet. Whereas Luffy has continuously been fighting at full power since their fight started. Now round 4. Since Kaido fought Yamato while Luffy was recovering, many like to argue that during this period of time, Kaido took more damage than Luffy had taken all the way up to this point, due to fighting Yamato for such a long period of time, who at this point was still stronger than Luffy. However, this does not work as Kaido was not knocked out by Yamato, nor did he take any severe amount of damage. So he has still at this point not even reached chapter 1010, Luffy level of exhaustion. Now what about Luffy eating the meat though? It's never stated that Luffy got his stamina or his power back, nor is it stated that he fully healed here. He just recovered enough to where he was able to fight again. It was established earlier even that the Heart Pirates didn't even have enough meat for Luffy to really move, let alone fight. So once again, we can't say he healed enough to go above Kaido's HP and stamina here without any proper statements for it. And remember, at this point, Kaido still hasn't been knocked out whereas Luffy was. In fact, he was knocked out twice and exhausting all of his haki by constantly using Gear 4, which we know is a very quick stamina drain for Luffy. Due to all this, Luffy needed to consume all of Kaido's rations that he had saved up, and now people want to use this part to also say that Luffy healed all his injuries and his stamina, but this again makes no sense as we still see Luffy has visible injuries on him, and he's also still panting, showing that he's exhausted. Then when we get back to the rooftop, Kaido is even surprised to see that Luffy is still alive. He is a veteran warrior, so he pretty much expected Luffy to die when he dropped him off the roof, and he thought he would just succumb to his wounds. Next, we see Yamato state that Luffy has put everything on his back in the English Viz translation, but in the original Japanese it says Luffy is just barely standing, and this supports the notion that he's in worse condition than Kaido, because when we see what Yamato's thoughts are on Kaido's condition, she only says that he is slowly losing stamina, not that he's on his last legs like Luffy is. So we can lowball and say that HP is equal by this point, despite everything in the story pointing towards Luffy being in worse condition. Round 5. Not much happens here, it's mostly just a back and forth between Luffy and Kaido, with neither necessarily having a huge advantage, though over time Kaido does seem to be doing better on average. But the big change is when Kaido hits Luffy with a big attack here after CP0 agent gets in the way. This leads to round 6, which starts at the end of chapter 142. In this chapter, Luffy died. There's pretty much no argument to say he didn't die here or wasn't at least severely weakened to almost death. Multiple characters say many times that Luffy's haki has almost or has totally disappeared, and they imply he's dead due to this. Kaido himself also believes Luffy is fully dead at this point, and he can't sense Luffy's haki anymore. Even if you give Kaido the benefit of doubt, you can't really claim that Luffy at this point is in a better condition than Kaido, considering everyone pretty much believes he is dead and can't even sense his haki. And this might even be the worst state he has ever been in his entire life at this point. So again, Kaido, who hasn't even been knocked out at this point, is clearly in a far, far better condition than Luffy. He has not only been knocked out twice, but was pretty much killed directly by Kaido. Now we have the final and most important part of this fight, and that is Gear 5 Luffy vs Kaido. The major issue with Gear 5 is that people want to claim that Gear 5 gives Luffy not only all of his stamina, but it regens all his wounds. This does not make much sense. If he had just healed all of his injuries and got his stamina back, why would he say this? We can also see that he still visibly has his injuries and is panting later on. Him being extremely low on HP and stamina is also supported by Kaido's later statement after Luffy drops out of Gear 5, where he says Luffy has reached his limit, hasn't he? Now, an important panel here is that we see Kaido dropping to his knees. This is the first truly big indicator that he's actually losing a lot of his stamina. It's also supported by Yamato later. But this does not imply or confirm that Kaido is close to Luffy's condition, who we can see is visibly far more exhausted than Kaido, whereas Kaido doesn't even admit he's getting close to his limit, whereas Luffy does. He literally says, "I'm all tuckered out." He even admits he was dying before this, and that it takes a lot of energy to use Gear 5. Momo himself also confirms that Luffy is slowly dying here, and since Kaido and Yamato are also supporting this, this clearly means that out of the two here, Luffy is in the worst condition. But here we see Luffy overcomes this and forces himself back into Gear 5. Now for full power Kaido. Via the statements here, we can see this is Kaido preparing to truly go all out for the first time during this fight. And this is easily the strongest version of Hybrid Kaido we have ever seen up to this point. Now, for the final clash, this can be seen in two different ways. One, you can say Kaido taking Luffy head on means he could have dodged Badrang and won ultimately. However, this does not factor in that Luffy is more damaged than Kaido here, as we have stated many times. And a full 1v1 where he wouldn't have literally have just died moments before, he would not be forced to use Badrang so soon in the fight. And he could have waited a lot longer in the rematch. The second interpretation is Kaido wants to test who's more powerful, and then he uses his flaming dragon torch. This is somewhat implied by Kaido, as he said Luffy is the hero they were waiting for. Since Kaido's whole purpose is to guard Wano against Joy Boy, this is his test to see if Luffy can beat him and become Joy Boy. This means Kaido is fully intending here, and Oda is also implying that whoever wins this clash is the more powerful of the two. Then we see them both at full power, fully clashing, and it stays like this for a minute, neither really gaining the advantage until at the last moment when Kaido asks what kind of world Luffy wants to create. Luffy gets one final Haki Bloom, and then here he just pretty much straight up overpowers Kaido and literally knocks him out. Then we see the King and Kaido flashback, which also supports that Luffy is Joy Boy, which means Joy Boy is stronger than Kaido, because Kaido said only Joy Boy could surpass him. This means in this moment, this final clash, Luffy truly and fully surpassed Kaido. So if you guys don't know, I posted a Twitter thread for this video a few weeks ago, and in that thread I had a few people disagreeing with me, so here I want to address a few points people made. One, a couple people brought up to me how I compared the fodder Luffy fought to the commander tier scabbards that Kaido fought. Now, yes, while Kaido did technically fight stronger people and for longer on average than Luffy did before Chapter 1000, this argument does not factor in the fact that Kaido is far, far stronger than Luffy was at this point. So the level of people he was fighting would seem like fodder to him, just like how the Beast Pirates were fodder to Luffy. He in fact could one-shot any of the scabbards at any moment he wanted to. In fact, we even see Luffy get surprised, knocked out by a Prue briefly, and he has many small scuffles with even stronger people like Ulti, whereas Kaido only really got a few cuts and was never knocked out like Luffy was, meaning the whole argument is pointless as Luffy still took more damage despite fighting weaker people anyway. Also, all of this means little when in the first round of their fight, Kaido brutally knocked Luffy, so why does it matter if Kaido fought the Scabbards first when Luffy took more damage in their first round than Kaido did anyway? In conclusion, Luffy vs Kaido was one of the most contentious debates in the community, and it will probably remain as one of the most contentious until Egghead Island wraps up. Oda himself is very unlikely to answer it very soon, but if he does, it would have to be in story or in SBS for people to truly come to terms that Luffy is stronger. Regardless, I think I've given enough info and panels here to show that for the majority of the fight, Luffy was in a worse condition than Kaido, and despite all of that, he still beat Kaido at the end anyway. Meaning he's basically already won this fight and surpassed Kaido as it is. So a current Egghead Luffy, who is stronger from the get-go, and would probably go even more in their hypothetical rematch, which would make it even more clear that Luffy would win here. And thus I think it's very likely that if they were the 1v1 again right now at full health with no interruptions, and it was only just a proper 1v1 beatdown between the two, Luffy would come out the winner like he did last time.